All right, some four-legged burglars are on the prowl in Harlem. Raccoons running amok, breaking into homes, helping themselves to food, and leaving behind a big mess.
CBS 2's Vanessa Murdoch has more now on how the pests are getting too close for comfort.
Residents say help to get rid of this rack pack can't come soon enough.
I want the city to come in and get rid of them.
Now they're used to humans feeding them, and they love that. You'd have to have them trapped and removed from the property.
You look like a family just walking up the block casually. I know you're not supposed to see raccoons in the city.
Ordinarily, I'd think anybody who handled a raccoon was out of his mind.
I think that we all have to learn how to sort of live on this planet together, and I think these raccoons have, you know, just as much right as all the rest of us.
Wildlife, animal species totally support our ecosystems. They, support the resources that we use to drive to work every day and breathe fresh air. So anything that we can do to give back to our environment, I think, is 101,000,000% worth it.
Okay, we had an exciting case come in this past 4 days ago. We had a little girl raccoon. She's from this year's litter. She weighs 12 pounds. She was hit by a car, but fortunately she was hit only in the face or the head. And here are some of the injuries that she incurred. This is her upper palate here, and it was totally ripped out. Her lower jaw is fractured. You can see where the teeth on the bottom are separated. So let's go down and take a look and see how she's doing now. Here we go, Sadie. Come on, little girl. Here we go. Well, my name is Richard Wogemuth, and I'm the founder of Wildlife Wishing Well. Wildlife Wishing Well is a wildlife rehabilitation center where we receive sick, injured, and orphaned animals, wildlife animals, not cats and dogs or parakeets and snakes, except those that come from the wild. This little girl just arrived yesterday, and this is not an uncommon reason for a raccoon to come here. It was perfectly happy, doing perfectly well in a tree in a city, unfortunately, and construction came along, knocked down all the trees, and it was homeless and began to fade. It was, when it was found, it was starved, it was cold, it was skinny, and she's quite wild, and she'll have to be calmed down. Do not try this at home, boys and girls. Well, unfortunately, our population is growing. For the most part, there's exceptions, of course. If an injured animal is found out in the wild, nature has a way of taking care of its own. Wild animals have litters. Perhaps it's because there's a certain number of them that are expected to die. But unfortunately, as our population spreads, we are invading their environment. Two different homeowners found the cute little baby raccoon and decided they were going to hold on to them because they were really neat and they were pretty and they were cute. And then they found out once they get big, they eat a lot, they're expensive, they lose their ability to use the litter box, they get nippy, and they're not as much fun anymore. So then they find a rehabilitator to take them and get them wild again. This is Sasha, and she's a little sweetheart, but she's going to be leaving this room pretty soon and going out to a pre-release area where she'll be wilded up. And little Bruno here, he has the same problem. He was kept as a pet and then got to be too much, so he's got to be released soon. Now, the third one, the big guy here, he had a different problem. He's had a couple medical problems. He was found as a little baby in a chimney, and when he arrived here, he was all covered with soot. Somehow people just know to bring raccoons to me. The first raccoon I ever had while I was in the Army, I was only a private, and we had wall lockers where we kept our uniforms, and I came across my first raccoon. So where do you put it? You don't want the Army to find it and chew you out or make you do KP or guard duty for the next 2 years. So it ended up in my wall locker. That little fella became our company mascot and lived, well, we finally released him after 4 years. And of course, the first sergeant discovered it, and he understood. It was wonderful. The military was more understanding than the New York governmental bureaucracy. It isn't that we have more strict rabies laws. We probably have, for the most part, we're on a par with other states. But common sense is not used in New York State. I apologize for saying that. Health people who should be concerned with the public health and safety, the environmental people, which should be concerned with the environment as far as water, even wildlife, but they don't know the animals, and that's part of our problem. Okay, so this is Sadie. What we're going to try to do is give her medications, which we'll have to maneuver her head position so that the medication flows down into the throat, because she doesn't have swallow capability due to the injury to the jaw. And then we'll take a look and see how her jaw and palate are healing. Here we go.
Okay. So her lower jaw is broken on the left and right in the very center. And so her lower jaw is kind of cocked to the right a little bit. Her roof of her mouth, where that split is that you saw in the photograph, is healing nicely.
Now, she could not move her tongue at all when she
Yeah.
first came in. It was split, it was swollen.
Her tongue's working great, so that's a really good sign.
She was a bloody mess when she came in. It was very sad. Good girl, Sadie. Wildlife Wishing Well has 12 or 13 volunteers. Hopefully, they'll be able to they'll carry on the tradition and take care of the facility here after I'm gone. I'm getting older. I don't feel old. I don't feel like I'm going anyplace. But reality is, it is getting time for me to think about handing over the baton.
We focus as being a rabies vector species facility because there's a tiny, tiny number of them in the entire state of New York. And New York is big. I'm glad that we focus on rabies vector species because a lot of people are misinformed and scared. And we see how sweet they are. Unless they take your headband and break it, not as nice. I've lost a lot of headband.
Yeah, my wife Donna was my best volunteer. She had her rabies shots, of course. None of us, no good rehabber would get involved with animals without having proper protection. We were married 38 years. And for 38 years, she and I advocated for wildlife. Then 7 years ago, she suffered a heart attack, went too long without oxygen, and was in a coma for 7 years, but she was still inside. She could still hear, she could still see. Sort of like the Terry Schiavo case. Well, my wife Donna passed away earlier this year. I don't want this to sound selfish, but she had her own income and help pay for the care of the animals. Unfortunately, that makes it harder now. Even though we're getting more animals, we have less income. So hopefully we'll find some way to come around get around that obstacle. A person has to experience contact with a newborn baby animal that becomes dependent on you, just like a human baby. Any parent that's had a child, well, if they had a child, of course, they're a parent. But any parent knows just how heartwarming, how affectionate an infant can be, a human infant. Well, baby animals are the same way. They're dependent. They look up at you. You get this warm, fuzzy feeling in your chest. Then you become torn. What's the right thing to do for this animal, and how can I overcome my attachment for it? And to tell you the truth, if I didn't know there was more babies coming next year, it would be hard for me to release them this year. Okay, this is Nellie. Nellie's the more wild one. Now, what I expect Nellie to do, it would not surprise me if Nellie weren't released on top of the condominium here or on top of the nest box, if she jumped down and ran right off. I would like to think that Peter here is going to stick around for at least one night, if not 3 or 4. I'm going to release Peter first, so he will be a familiar sight that Nellie might stay here rather than jump off and just run away. Remember, these two came from the wild, so they are independent, but I'll miss them should they take off immediately. Okay, here we go, Peter. Now Peter is actually free. He could run off into the woods at any time that he wishes. Now Nellie here is going to be a little bit different. There you have it. Now they have shelter, they have food, and they're welcome to stay as long as they wish. And each night they'll get out and they'll explore and eventually go off on their own. These two should go off fairly soon, in just anywhere from 1 to 4 or 5 nights. The others will take possibly as much as 2 weeks, because they were raised in captivity. And this is what you call a successful soft release.
Thank you.